Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Delighted on this episode to be talking with Jumpmaster Press author Will Neely. May I call you Will? Is that okay?
Yes, please.
All right. All right. Well, welcome and many thanks for stopping by. Always glad to talk about storytelling, science fiction, and I think you're going to also take us into some conversation about Western storytelling as well. So I'm excited about that.
Definitely. Yeah, me
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for having
Uh,
me. Pleasure to be here.
of course, of course. Glad to have you. What connected you initially with authoring and the written word?
Man, I think it's a lot of people's story. Learning how to read, reading with your parents, or reading with my parents as a kid. Um, I feel like had a book in my hand from the time that I learned to read, which is as early as I can remember. Um, I used to walk around holding a book, walk around the house. According to my mom, would run into walls occasionally because I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. I was just, I had a story in my hand, and so the rest of the world kind of could wait. So that's something I've always loved. Never really had the urge to write until I guess about 8 or 9 years ago. I've always loved fantasy and sci-fi, anything that couldn't happen necessarily in real life, or at least no time soon. Um, and I had this idea for a story that didn't exist, and I couldn't get it out of my head. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so months later, I sat down to just begin to write what turned out to be my first novel. And it it uh it was so long thinking about the story and the concept that the novel itself just kind of came out when I finally sat down to type it all out. And that was, I guess, probably 7 or 8 years ago. Um, maybe a little more recently. I have a couple of books that I wrote before I met with Jumpmaster, and so that's one of
Okay.
those. Yeah, it's a novel called Fate's Balance. It is on Amazon. It's self-published. It's not a Jumpmaster book. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool, cool. I was going to ask about the creative spark for Sixaway Star, but shall we start with the title that's self-published on Amazon? What was the creative spark that got you there that you couldn't let
Sure.
go of?
Sure. I don't. I can't point to a single moment, but I can tell you that something I've always found fascinating is how we as people, we are kind of obsessed with authority and responsibility and consequences and trying to separate them all out. Like we all kind of want to be that teenager phase where we have the authority, but we don't really have the consequences that come along with that authority. And so being a fantasy guy, I started to wonder what if there was a magic system that kind of let you delay consequences for certain actions.
Mhm.
What if each person had kind of a different domain where they could delay consequences, be it gravity or mass or an element, one of the classic elements like water or fire. What say you could do things to basically incur consequences, but then hold those consequences in yourself until a later time. It is I couldn't let go of the idea. I couldn't forget about it. It has
Cool.
similarities with other fantasy systems that are out there, but nothing that's exactly like this, as far as I know. And so I sat down to write it, and I wrote on and off for a number of years before I finally finished and self-published it. And my wife, when I finally finished, said, "I didn't think you were going to finish." She's like, "That was really big." I said, "It was." But I was pretty happy to have it out. The second book was much faster, so yeah.
Yeah. And what about Sixaway Star? What was the impetus for that?
Yeah, so Sixaway Star, and that is if your listeners don't know, that is a Wild West fantasy. It's like a mashup of cowboys and magic and monsters. Um, I guess, from the time that I was 10 or 11, I've kind of enjoyed reading the pulp westerns. My dad and my granddad grew up reading Louis L'Amour books, And
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
meet a lot of people, and I'm one of them, whose parents or grandparents had a whole shelf or two just full of Louis L'Amour Westerns. And so in my mind, they were kind of always my granddad's books or my dad's books. But then I picked one up one day and started reading it, and I found the whole thing very interesting. I didn't really know much about the Western genre as a kid. It wasn't like I wasn't raised in the West. I wasn't raised around the cowboy culture, but I just found the entire world and that time period just fascinating. And so I read all of them many times over the next several years. And at some point, I wondered why are there no or very very few westerns that mix that kind of genre and that kind of time period with more of your straightforward fantasy. You know, there's a decent number of space westerns out there of all flavors. I've got a book of short space western stories that I wrote myself that's out there on Amazon, but and there's more than a handful of Western horror, right? You've got your Weird West, which has got elements of Lovecraft or elements of more your zombie horror story. And I have touches of that in Sixaway Star, but there's not many, as far as I know, of the more straightforward fantasy. Think like Brandon Sanderson's kind of well thought out magic system with rules that you kind of have to follow, or like the Jim Butcher urban fantasy. But we didn't go all the way to the urban. We just kind of stopped in the 1800s in the West. And so
Yeah.
I once I thought that I kind of puzzled around in my head for a little bit. I wrote some short stories, some space western short stories, trying to practice writing Western dialogue. I'd never done that before. And then I started the first book, and I love the concept so much. I stopped writing. I outlined an entire series, and then I said, okay, now I can go. You may have figured out I'm a planner, very very much so when it comes to writing. So once I had the whole series outlined, I felt free to go ahead and just write it out. And the first book of the Sixaway Star, The Quick and the Undead, took about 9 months to finish. The second one, High Moon, took about 4 months to finish. And the third one took a little longer because I did grad school in the middle of that one, but that's a different story. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's where I came from. It's just two genres which I love and wanted to bring together.
Cool. Yeah. I was going to ask about sort of the how-to. How do you go about crafting stories using Western tropes? Are there tips or ideas that you have on that to share?
Yeah, that's a big question. So can I kind of break up the answer a little bit? Is that okay?
Of course. Of course.
Thanks.
Please do.
Um, as far as stories in general, and fiction in general, I usually know what the idea is before I start. I very rarely just kind of start writing and see what my characters do and then make a story out of it. Other people do it other ways, that's fine. That's not a value judgment on their process at all. But what I generally do is I have an idea of what the story is going to be. I sit down and I put some words around that. And if I can't kind of articulate what the theme is, even in a general sense, then I think on it some more before I really start. I begin to make outlines, and my outlines start out as bullet points. And as I make my outlines, I start to see the scenes in my mind, or I start to hear what the characters are saying. And for me, language, even reading it written, it's always in my head. I always kind of hear the cadence of the words, and that has a lot of bearing on how I write dialogue, actually. But uh, as I'm as I'm outlining, sometimes a scene will just grab me. So I'll right there in the outline write out a paragraph or several sentences, and then just leave it in the outline. I'll say, okay, when I get there, that part's already written, and then I'll keep going until I have, at least a very general sense of where the story is going to go. And then I kind of treat that as a fence, and I know who my characters are at this point, so I let my characters play around as much as they want inside that fence. That gives the work, a little more of a free flow to it. At least I think it does.
Oh,
Um, and I ever get to the point, which happens sometimes, where a character seems to really want to go outside the fence that I've drawn. Maybe I did the fence wrong. I have to revisit it. I have there's a group of guys that I get together with about once a month, and we read sections of each other's work and offer comments. And sometimes I'll email one of them and say, "Hey, I'm kind of struggling with this part. Will you double check it and see if it rings true or if it doesn't, if you know why." And that's very helpful to have friends that can help out with that.
Cool.
And
Yeah.
that so that's one section of your of your answer. But you asked about Western tropes specifically, right?
hmm and I'm going to give love to your process too, because in my writing about writing, I love outlining and love that idea of crafting scenes as you go and kind of letting the outline be your flexible tool.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
hmm
Uh, it really works. I know some people don't prefer it, but I it helps. At least it helps me a lot. So yeah. So Western tropes specifically.
hmm
That putting Western with fantasy turned out to be so much more fun, Jason, than I knew that it would be. There is so much overlap between the two that it took me by surprise. I mentioned before, I like a hard, fairly consistent magic system. I like for there to be rules. And that really helps because with a limited magic system, you kind of preserve some of what exists in Westerns because it was essential for the time period. For example, a Western without a six shooter, I mean, it's still a Western, but it misses one of the kind of the key icons of that genre.
hmm
So if I have a world where there is magic, why does anyone use a gun? So I had to answer that question. Um, and the route that I took kind of opened up a lot of other Western tropes because the route I took was one uh, of symbols and symbology, where writing certain ways or crafting things in certain shapes could be used in all these magical ways, or was the only real way to use these magical effects. And so by doing that, I all of a sudden had access to um, the aspect of the Western world where you had often had a scribe or a few people who were quite learned, and many cowboys would read, but not many of them had much occasion to write. So maybe there's a little of the professional scribe. And of course, the idea of symbols having certain meaning and certain power overlaps almost exactly with the idea of branding. If you have a brand on your cattle or your horse, that means, well, this is mine. Well, now in my world, that means this is mine. But also, those who can use magic can go a little bit further with the idea. So it opened up a whole lot of just kind of mechanical things, which are great because I'm a big fan of every element of the story serving more than one purpose. It really kind of ties your whole world together if there's overlap. Another kind of in bigger picture, some of the similarities between Westerns and fantasy are the fact that you are on the border between kind of the known and the unknown. The frontier is the frontier. It is that edge between two worlds.
hmm
And even something as simple as just the concept of good and evil. That's a in most Westerns, most classic Westerns especially, that is a strong theme, and it's one that is also a strong theme in most of classic fantasy. More recent works aside, it's not 100% there, but in the kind of the classic fantasy genre, you've got morality and you've got questions of, okay, is this right or is this wrong? You have people who believe very strongly one way or the other, and they find themselves at odds. And you even, if you go back to the old Western TV shows, you've got the black hats and the white hats just to mark good guys and bad guys. And I don't really
Sure.
want to write anything that simplistic, but the Western genre kind of carries with it this underlying sense of there's good and there's bad. And that matches with a lot of classic fantasy in a fun way.
Yeah, yeah, very, very cool. And I love the thoughtful process. I know just a little bit about Western storytelling, and so glad to pick your brain on that.
Oh, thanks. I am not the master, but I'm a very ardent student. I can say that.
Well, what are you working on currently?
So right now, I'm working on two big projects. My Most of my writing time is spent working on the Sixaway Star book four. And it's well underway, by which I mean I'm maybe 20% done with the first part, but that's okay. So that's going well. It's like I mentioned before, I already had an outline of the story in the book and where this was going to go and how it fits into the overall picture. That made it easy to sit down and just kind of start writing. And then I'm spending a little bit of my time right now on a side project. I have a series of novellas that I want to write. I have seven of them in mind, and I have kind of I mentioned before I want to put words around the theme of each of them. So I've got the themes of all seven, and then the outline for the first couple of them. So I'm working on that. I'm working on that novella series as well. But that'll be sometime in the future. I want to write a few of those before I start publishing them because they're so short.
Nice, nice, yeah. Love the novella form as well. It's an interesting one.
It is. It is. I I have two short story collections that are published, self-published on Amazon, and I didn't have a lot of respect. I didn't have enough respect, I think, for short story writing before I started. And
Mhm.
once I had written a few, I realized, oh, this is like writing a novel, but harder because you can't bloat, you can't waste any words. You have to say
Yeah,
what you want to say.
very condensed. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, if I'm a listener and I want to find out more, if I want to follow along with your work, where are some places that I might do that?
Yeah, so a couple options. If you search my name on Amazon, Will Neely, Ly, not Ley, that's someone different. Then all my stuff is there, Jumpmaster published and also self-published. Amazon, at least for my own computer, has stopped asking me if I meant something else when I type in my own name, so that's a positive sign.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's a threshold.
Yes. The Sixaway Star series, of course, is available on jumpmasterpress.com. And if you are interested in keeping tabs on when I go to events, I'm on Facebook at Will Neely Author. You can find me there, and I'm also on Goodreads under Will Neely. It's all my name. I don't use a pseudonym for anything pertaining
Sa-
to your listeners. But if you do happen to read any of my work and you enjoy it, I would love it if you let me know. Either a Facebook message, an email. Probably the most helpful way would be a review on Amazon or Goodreads. Though people, mostly companies and groups that are looking to kind of give a signal boost, they like to see a lot of reviews for authors. So that's one way you can really help me and any other local author that you want to support. So I would really appreciate that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Will, many thanks for the time, many thanks for the writing wisdom,
Thank you.
and glad to have you back anytime.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it, Jason.